Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be trying to get our heads around this guy, Madison Grant, early 20th century, and really obsessed with race.
Yeah.
We're going through excerpts from his book, The Passing of the Great Race, published in 1916.
Oh, yeah. This was a big one.
Yeah.
Really influential for its time. You can see how people were thinking back then about race and anthropology. A lot of it, well, we know better now.
Right. Full disclosure, some of Grant's ideas are, well, let's just say they haven't aged well.
That's funny.
But we're not endorsing anything here. We're just trying to unpack these ideas, see how they worked, how they unfortunately shaped a lot of societal views.
Like opening a time capsule. Kind of fascinating to peek into the past, see how they grappled with these really complicated issues, sensitive issues, even back then.
Yeah, right from the start, Grant kind of throws you a curveball. He's really insistent that race, language, nationality, totally separate things. Why was that so important to him?
Well, he saw race as like the foundation of everything. Culture, civilization, even a person's character. Mixing those up. That was messing with the purity of a superior race, in his view. At least that's how he saw it.
And he even uses terms like Latin race or Aryan race as examples of, I guess, what he thought was like bad categorization.
Exactly, because those terms are all about language, not biological kinship. Like, just because you speak Spanish doesn't mean you're suddenly related to, someone from ancient Rome, at least according to Grant.
He loved his categories. He divided Europeans into, let's see, there's Nordic, Alpine, and Mediterranean.
Oh, and you can already guess his favorite.
The Nordics.
Of course. Tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed. To him, they were the natural leaders, the explorers, the ones who pushed civilization forward.
Alpines, they got to be the sturdy, peaceful type. And Mediterraneans, artistic, but maybe not leadership material in his mind.
It all sounds pretty, well, basic now. But this was serious stuff back then. That's how some people really saw the world.
He basically created like a hierarchy of Europeans, Nordics at the top, obviously.
Oh, absolutely. And that leads right into his biggest worry, the decline of the quote-unquote great race, as he called it. Like, it was under attack, even from the inside.
Wait, he thought Nordics were in danger, even though they were supposed to be superior.
Exactly. He was really concerned about interbreeding. Remember, racial purity was everything to him. Mixing with other groups, that was like diluting the bloodline, leading to, and I'm using his words here, racial degeneration.
Yikes.
And that wasn't his only fear either. War, modern city life, those were problems too.
He thought those were bad for Nordics.
War, because it killed off the strongest, most vigorous men. Cities, because they favored, well, less robust types, in his view. Almost like modernity itself was the enemy.
So what was his solution? Like, should all the Nordics just move to the countryside and, I don't know, start a commune or something?
Well, there's a bit of that, but it gets more complicated, especially when you get to America. He was really worried about what was happening here.
Because of immigration.
Exactly. All those people coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. He saw that as a direct threat to the Nordic character of the country. And that's where things start to take a darker turn.
You're saying he wanted to control who could come to America, who could have kids?
That's putting it mildly. He started pushing for policies that would discriminate against certain groups, even promoting ideas that would later, well, fuel the eugenics movement.
We're going to need a whole other deep dive to unpack that one.
Definitely a dark chapter in history.
Yeah.
And we'll get into all of that later. So, back to Madison Grant and the passing of the great race. Before we get to his solutions for America, you might be wondering, what was he basing all this on? Like, did he have actual evidence?
Yeah, it's one thing to claim Nordics are, destined to rule the world. But was there any proof?
That's where things get a little, well, flimsy. He was working with the science of his time, which, let's be honest, hasn't exactly held up.
Early 20th century science? I'm guessing they weren't exactly nuanced about, well, anything.
Not really. Grant was really into physical traits, like obsessed with them. He would look at skeletal remains of ancient Europeans, particularly the ones with long skulls, tall stature. That was proof of Nordic dominance in his mind.
So basically, he saw a tall skeleton and said, yep, that's a Nordic. Case closed.
Pretty much. And then he'd link those features to the spread of Indo-European languages. Like, there was this direct connection between, how you looked and how your culture developed.
But we know now that language and culture are way more fluid. People adopt new languages, new customs, doesn't change their DNA.
Exactly. It's like saying everyone who speaks English must be, directly descended from the British. Obviously not how it worked.
Okay, so the physical evidence was, let's say, questionable.
Yeah.
What about historical accounts? Did he use those at all?
Oh, he did. But again, it was all filtered through his very specific lens. He'd read about, the rise and fall of civilizations. And to him, it all boiled down to the presence or absence of Nordic blood.
So thriving society must be the Nordics. Crumbling empire. They must have, mixed with the wrong people and weakened the bloodline.
That's the gist of it. Super simplistic, right? It ignores all the other factors that, actually shape history. Economics, politics, the environment, you name it.
It's like he cherry-picked the evidence that fit his narrative. Anything that didn't, he just ignored it.
That's a fair criticism. But to be fair to Grant, this kind of deterministic thinking was pretty common back then, not just him.
I guess it's a good reminder that even smart people can get caught up in the trends of their time. Makes you wonder what ideas we have now that, future generations are going to look back on and just shake their heads.
Right. It's kind of humbling, actually. But despite all its problems, Grant's book really resonated with people. It tapped into these anxieties about immigration, national identity. The world was changing fast back then, and people were looking for answers.
His fear about the great race disappearing, it was like a reflection of a bigger fear. Like Western civilization itself was in decline.
Exactly. And those fears had consequences. We've mentioned eugenics, but his work also fueled racist ideologies, contributed to discriminatory immigration policies.
So his ideas didn't just stay in the realm of academic debate. They actually had an impact on, real people's lives.
Absolutely. His book was even translated and read in Nazi Germany, where they, twisted it to support their own horrific racial theories.
That's a pretty stark reminder of how dangerous ideas can be, even when they're based on, bad science.
Yeah, but it's also important to remember that not everyone who read Grant took away the same message. Some might have seen it as a legitimate attempt to understand human diversity, even if they disagreed with his conclusions.
So the impact of a book like this, it depends on who's reading it, what they choose to focus on.
Exactly. And the context matters, too. Grant's ideas resonated in a time of, upheaval, uncertainty. People were looking for simple explanations for complex problems.
Okay, so we've talked about Grant's anxieties, his questionable evidence, and the impact of his work. But he didn't just, complain about the decline of the Great Race, did he? He actually had ideas about how to fix it.
Oh, he did. And those solutions, they really reveal a lot about how he saw the world and how far he was willing to go to preserve, what he considered the natural order of things.
This is where it gets even more intense, isn't it?
You could say that. Get ready to explore the world of selective breeding, social engineering, and a vision of the future that's both, strangely familiar and completely alien to how we think today.
Okay, we're back. And I'm kind of stealing myself here. We left off with Madison Grant and his, his whole thing about the Great Race disappearing. Now we're getting into his solutions, and yeah, I'm a little nervous.
It gets pretty intense. Grant's solutions, they really lay bare the most, I guess you could say, disturbing parts of his thinking. Remember, racial purity was everything to him. Mixing. That was the ultimate no-no.
So did he, actually want to separate everyone into different groups? Like, no mixing allowed?
He wasn't that straightforward about it. But yeah, he pushed for policies that would basically make it really hard for people of different races to marry, have kids. It's all about controlling who reproduces, right?
Mm-hmm.
Preserving that Nordic bloodline.
So it's like a human breeding program. He gets to decide who can have kids with who.
That's not far off, honestly. And this wasn't just some theory for him. These ideas, they fed directly into the eugenics movement. And that had some really horrific consequences.
Yeah, we're talking forced sterilization, even euthanasia, all in the name of, improving the human race. It's hard to believe that was considered, acceptable.
A really dark chapter. And Grant's work, while it didn't directly cause those things, it definitely added fuel to the fire.
And it wasn't just mixing that worried him. War was a problem too, but not for the, the obvious reasons.
Right? He wasn't a pacifist. He thought Nordics were natural warriors, that war was a test of their strength. But then he also realized that modern warfare was wiping out huge numbers of young men, the very men he thought were, superior.
So it's like a double-edged sword. War proves how strong Nordics are, but also kills them off.
Yeah, kind of a weird contradiction. But it shows how much he feared modernity, anything that threatened that idealized Nordic strength. Cities were bad too, crowded, full of technology. He romanticized this simple rural life where everyone was strong and healthy.
He wanted to go back in time, basically, back to when, I guess, in his mind, everything was in its right place. The racial hierarchies were clear.
There's a lot of nostalgia there for sure. This yearning for a past that, well, probably never really existed. But you see that a lot throughout history. People get scared of change and they start looking back with rose-colored glasses.
So what was his grand plan? Did he really think everyone should just, like, ditch the cities and become farmers?
He liked the idea of a more agrarian lifestyle, that's for sure. But he went way beyond that. He wanted policies that would, encourage the right people to have lots of kids and discourage or even prevent the wrong people from reproducing at all.
So he wasn't just trying to change how people behaved. He wanted to use the government to literally control, like, the biological makeup of society.
And that's where it gets really scary. It's one thing to have your own beliefs, but to try and enforce them on everyone else, using the power of the state, that's dangerous territory.
It shows that ideas, even when they're based on prejudice and bad science, they can have a real impact on the world, especially when they get mixed up with politics.
That's the lesson here. Grant's work, despite all its flaws, it influenced a lot of people. Policymakers, thinkers, even those who led to the horrors of eugenics, racist immigration policies. It all built on what he was saying.
So what do we take away from all of this? Why are we even talking about this guy when most of his ideas have been, thoroughly debunked?
Well, for one thing, it shows that even outdated ideas can have a long-lasting effect. We can't just ignore them and hope they go away.
It's like they say, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it, right?
Exactly. And Grant's story, it's a warning about essentialist thinking. The idea that you can just categorize people based on some, fixed trait and then rank them. That kind of thinking leads to prejudice, discrimination, even violence.
And it reminds us how important it is to think for ourselves, to be critical of the information we get, especially when it comes from people who seem, like they're experts.
Absolutely. In a world where there's so much information out there, being able to sort through it all, figure out what's true and what's not, that's more important than ever.
Well, this has been quite a journey, exploring the mind of Madison Grant. It's definitely given me a lot to think about, the power of ideas, how easy it is for them to spread, even when they're wrong, and how important it is to fight back against those that are harmful.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Grant's vision of the future, thankfully, it never came true. But the fight against prejudice, against discrimination, that's still going on. And we all have a part to play in that.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep thinking critically, keep asking questions, and we'll see you next time.